I'm Elara Vance, 35. This morning, looking at an old photo of my father and me on an aircraft carrier, his words echoed in my mind. You don't have the instinct of a commander, Elara. That sentence shaped my entire life, pushing me into the shadow of my family's expectations. But last night, during a grueling exercise in the Pacific, I made a decision no one, not even my father, believed I was capable of. It brought no glory, just liberation. Before I tell you everything, tell me, where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. My life now is like a deep-sea submarine, moving in silence and shadow, far from the limelight and attention my family always craved. I'm an electronic warfare, EW, specialist for the U.S. Navy, working in classified labs in California, where invisible algorithms and signals decide battlefields. My work comes with no medals, no parades. I'm a master engineer of jamming and cyber defense. My work comes with no medals, no parades. My father, a retired Navy admiral who once commanded the Pacific Fleet, always considered my position a support role, not the front lines. He saw it as something akin to a back-office function, a necessary but ultimately secondary component to the grand theater of naval command. He didn't understand that the battles of today and tomorrow are fought not just with steel and fire, but with information, with frequencies, with the silent, unseen wars waged in the electromagnetic spectrum. My work, to him, was always just playing with computers, a hobby, not a calling. It was a constant hum of dismissal in the background of my existence. Before the storm, my world was a meticulously constructed veneer of calm and dedication. I found solace in the hum of servers, the intricate dance of data packets, the elegant logic of code. My apartment, small and Spartan, was a sanctuary filled with the scent of ozone from my workstation and the quiet rustle of technical manuals. I remember late nights, the only light spilling from my monitor, the rhythmic click of my keyboard as I delved deeper into complex encryption algorithms or mapped out vulnerabilities in simulated networks. There was a profound satisfaction in unraveling a digital puzzle, in seeing a system bend to my will, not through force, but through understanding. Each line of code I wrote, each circuit I traced, felt like a brick laid in the foundation of my own independence. I wasn't a ship commanding vast oceans, but I was a sentinel, guarding the unseen pathways, the invisible arteries of communication that kept the fleet alive. I felt a quiet pride in that, a deep sense of purpose that resonated with my very being. I'd often walk along the California coast after a long day, the salt spray on my face, the vastness of the Pacific stretching out before me. The ocean, unlike my family, held no judgment. It simply was. I'd watch the cargo ships on the horizon, tiny specks against the immense blue, and imagine the invisible signals crisscrossing the air, the silent conversations happening far beyond human hearing. This was my world, a world of silent power, of unseen influence. I was good at it. More than good, I was exceptional. My colleagues, men and women who spoke my language of binary and bandwidth, respected me. They saw the precision in my work, the intuitive leaps I made in debugging complex systems, the quiet intensity with which I approached every challenge. We shared a camaraderie built on shared intellectual curiosity and a mutual understanding of the high stakes involved in our niche field. We were the silent guardians, the digital architects, and there was a quiet dignity in that. Yet, even in these moments of professional fulfillment, the shadow of my family, particularly my father, loomed. The Vance family. A true Navy family, steeped in generations of maritime tradition. Every son became a commanding officer of a warship, and every daughter married one. It was an unspoken rule, a hereditary mandate etched into the very fabric of our lineage. I was the only daughter to join the military, but I was immediately seen as off course. My journey felt like a deviation, a discordant note in a long-established symphony. When I graduated from engineering school with honors, my path diverged sharply from the expected. The invitation to the traditional naval officer program arrived, a clear, well-trodden path, but I declined. My heart, my mind, was drawn to electronic warfare, to the intricate dance of signals and the silent battles of the digital realm. My father's reaction was not just disappointment, it was a volcanic eruption of fury. "A Vance doesn't hide in a tech room," he thundered, his voice shaking the very foundations of our formal living room. "You must command. You must be on the front lines." His words were like a branding iron, searing into my spirit. He saw my choice not as a different form of service, but as a deliberate defiance, a rejection of everything he held sacred. He disinherited me, not financially, but from the family's legacy, a concept he held dearer than any material wealth. My younger brother, Michael, who had always been less capable than me in academics, less driven, less naturally inclined toward the rigorous demands of military life, was suddenly elevated. He was the chosen one, the torchbearer, the one who would carry on the Vance name in the manner my father deemed appropriate. Every family gathering became a subtle, agonizing ordeal. I'd hear hushed comparisons, see pitying glances from aunts and uncles, as if I were an irreparable mistake, a broken artifact in a perfectly curated collection. "Such a shame Elara didn't follow the proper path," they'd murmur, their voices dripping with a false sympathy that felt more like condemnation. I became the anomaly, the cautionary tale, the daughter who dared to carve her own path and, in doing so, somehow diminished the family's luster. This constant, subtle erosion of my worth, not by strangers, but by the very people who should have championed me, was a slow, quiet bleed. Doubt, an insidious, creeping vine, began to entwine itself around the edges of my quiet confidence. It started subtly, a barely perceptible shift in the air. Little things. A sudden, unexplained delay in a project approval that I knew was sound. A moment of silence from a superior when I presented a complex solution, a silence that felt heavier than usual, laced with an unspoken skepticism. My gut, usually a reliable compass, began to twitch with unease. I'd dismiss it, of course, attributing it to stress, to overthinking, to the inherent complexities of classified work. But the feeling persisted, a low thrum beneath the surface of my meticulously ordered life. I remember one instance clearly. I was working on a sensitive counterintelligence system, a project that required absolute discretion and a level of trust that felt almost sacred. My team was small, tight-knit, and we operated with an unspoken understanding. One afternoon, I noticed a discrepancy in a data log, a small, almost imperceptible anomaly. It was the kind of thing most people would overlook, a single pixel out of place in a vast digital landscape. But my eye, trained for patterns and deviations, caught it. I traced it back, line by line, through layers of code, until I found it. A backdoor. Not a malicious hack from an external source, but an internal bypass, cleverly concealed. My mind reeled. Who would do this? And why? I brought it to the attention of my immediate supervisor, Commander Davies, a man I respected for his intellect and his seemingly unshakable integrity. He listened, his face a carefully neutral mask, his eyes unreadable. He nodded, thanked me for my vigilance, and assured me he would look into it personally. Days turned into a week. Nothing. The back door remained. The unease in my stomach twisted into a knot of dread. I felt a growing sense of isolation, a chilling realization that perhaps the trust one had placed in my professional environment was not as absolute as I had believed. I started to scrutinize every interaction, every casual comment, searching for hidden meanings, for the telltale signs of something amiss. My sleep became restless, haunted by fragmented lines of code and the ghost of a question: who can you truly trust? Then came the subtle shifts in the flow of information. Suddenly, memos I should have received were delayed or went missing entirely. Meetings I should have been privy to were held without my knowledge. Small, seemingly insignificant acts of exclusion that, when accumulated, began to paint a disturbing picture. It was like watching a perfectly woven tapestry slowly unravel, thread by thread, until the pattern became distorted and unrecognizable. I found myself second-guessing my own instincts, wondering if I was becoming paranoid. Was it my family's constant dismissal that was seeping into my professional life, making me see shadows where there were none? Or was something truly rotten beneath the surface? The silence from my father, usually a heavy, disapproving weight, became something else entirely. It wasn't just his usual disdain, it was a deliberate, calculated absence. Calls went unanswered. Emails ignored. It was as if he had consciously decided to erase me from his personal narrative, a preemptive strike before any public announcement. And then there was Michael. My younger brother, who had always ridden on the coattails of my father's expectations, suddenly seemed to glow with a new, almost smug confidence. He would send me cryptic texts full of veiled references to opportunities and advancements that seemed to materialize out of thin air for him, while I toiled in the quiet obscurity of the EW lab. He'd call, ostensibly to check in, but his questions felt like probes, designed to gauge my emotional state, to see if the weight of my father's disapproval was finally breaking me. I could hear the faint, almost imperceptible triumph in his voice, and it chilled me to the bone. The dread built, a slow, relentless tide, each small betrayal, each odd silence, each gut feeling adding to the inescapable certainty that a storm was brewing, and I was about to be caught in its eye. The air felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken truths, and I braced myself for the inevitable impact. The truth, when it finally struck, was not a sudden explosion but a slow-motion unraveling, a horrifying revelation that peeled back layers of meticulously constructed reality until nothing but raw, exposed nerve remained. Everything came to a head at a fleet anniversary gala my father hosted, a grand, ostentatious affair held in a cavernous ballroom overlooking the shimmering lights of the San Diego harbor. I was invited only because Michael, my younger brother, a rising officer, had, with an air of performative magnanimity, pleaded for it. He'd made it seem like a favor, a reluctant concession to familial duty, rather than a genuine desire for my presence. The air in the ballroom was thick with the clinking of glasses, the murmur of polite conversation, and the underlying current of ambition and hierarchy. Officers in crisp dress whites mingled with civilian dignitaries, their laughter echoing against the high ceilings. I felt like an imposter, a ghost drifting through a world that was both my birthright and my banishment. I wore a simple black dress, a stark contrast to the glittering gowns and laden uniforms that surrounded me. I was talking to some fellow engineers, quiet, brilliant minds who understood the true complexities of our work, discussing a new cybersecurity project we were about to launch. We were animated, our conversation filled with the jargon of our trade, our shared passion for innovation a small, comforting bubble in the overwhelming social din. Then a sudden chill descended, not from the air conditioning, but from the presence of my father. He approached, his posture rigid, his face set in an expression of paternal disapproval. He wasn't alone. He had a small entourage of his former colleagues, a group of distinguished-looking admirals and captains who nodded deferentially at his every word. My father's voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried a resonant baritone designed to command attention. "Oh, Elara's still here," he said, the words dripping with a condescension so thinly veiled it was almost transparent. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air, allowing his companions to register my presence as an inconvenience, an unexpected stain on his otherwise perfect evening. I thought she'd find a more suitable position in administration instead of just playing with computers. The phrase "playing with computers" was delivered with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if my entire profession was a childish diversion. He then turned to my colleagues, forcing a strained, almost pained smile. His eyes, usually cold and imperious, now held a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher, a malicious triumph, perhaps. "She lacks the qualities of a commander," he declared, his voice rising just enough to capture the attention of those around us. "She's only good at data backup." He emphasized the last two words, drawing them out, making them sound utterly trivial, utterly worthless. A ripple of quiet, polite laughter spread through the small circle, a sound like dry leaves rustling. It wasn't boisterous or crude, but it was far more devastating. It was the laughter of dismissal, of pity, of judgment. Pitying glances, like tiny, sharp needles, fell on me from the faces of my respected colleagues, faces that moments before had held genuine interest and camaraderie. The feeling that engulfed me was not anger, not rage, but a chilling, soul-deep numbness. It was the sensation of being publicly scorned, of having my life's work, my dedication, my very identity, completely erased and invalidated by my own father, right in front of the people I respected. It was as if the air was sucked out of the room, leaving me gasping in a silent vacuum. My vision blurred, the glittering lights of the ballroom becoming distorted streaks of color. My ears rang with the echo of his words, of the polite, pitying laughter. I stood there, frozen, a statue carved from humiliation and despair, feeling like I was dissolving into thin air, evaporating from existence. The world, the solid ground beneath my feet, had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. This was not just a verbal assault, it was an emotional execution. The silence that followed his words was more deafening than any shout, a silence that spoke of absolute, irrevocable collapse. My world, the one I had trusted, the one I had believed in, no longer existed. All that remained was the hollow echo of his contempt and the sickening realization that the betrayal was complete. That night, I drove home to my apartment, my car feeling like it was hauling a mountain of rocks, each one etched with the memory of my father's words, the echo of that stifled laughter. The city lights outside blurred into an indifferent smear. My father's words weren't just criticism, they were a death sentence, not to my body, but to my spirit, to every hope and dream I had meticulously built. He didn't just deny my capabilities, he completely erased my existence in the world I had fought so hard to belong to. He had reduced my entire professional life, my passion, my dedication, to a mere footnote, a negligible support role in his grand narrative of command and glory. I stumbled into my apartment, the silence amplifying the thundering beat of my own heart. I sat numbly in front of my computer, the familiar glow of the screen a cold comfort. The complex lines of code that usually made perfect sense, that were my language, my refuge, now seemed meaningless, a jumbled mess of symbols I no longer understood. I stared at them, unseeing, a profound void opening inside me. Had I been wrong? Had I wasted my youth, wasted everything pursuing a dream no one would acknowledge, a dream that even my own family deemed worthless? Despair enveloped me, cold and endless, a suffocating blanket that snuffed out every flicker of light. I wanted to disappear, to simply cease to exist. There was nothing left to fight for, nowhere left to run. The betrayal was complete, and I was utterly, devastatingly alone. But then, as I was sinking deeper into that profound darkness, a call came from an unknown number. The ringing startled me, a jarring intrusion into my private grief. I hesitated, almost letting it go to voicemail, but some unconscious impulse made me answer. "Major Vance," a voice asked, calm but authoritative. It was Colonel Thorne, the commanding officer of Naval Electronic Warfare Forces. Her voice, crisp and professional, cut through the fog of my despair like a laser. "This is Colonel Thorne. I want to personally inform you. This morning, Fleet Command received the full report on the Night Shield incident during the Pacific exercise." My breath hitched in my throat. The Night Shield exercise. It had been a grueling, high-stakes simulation designed to push our systems and our personnel to their absolute limits. We had been tasked with defending a critical communication network against a sophisticated, multi-layered cyber attack. The stakes had felt incredibly real, the pressure immense. I held my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, expecting a reprimand, a critique of some overlooked detail, another confirmation of my perceived inadequacy. Thorne continued, her voice growing stronger, gaining an almost imperceptible edge of admiration. "Your unit was the only one that successfully detected and neutralized the simulated attack. The report clearly states that you alone made the decision to change the encryption protocol within 17 seconds, an action entirely outside standard procedure, but one that saved the entire fleet from exposure. Major Vance, you were the only one who saw the potential danger in the noise. You demonstrated a sharp and unprecedented command instinct. And I told retired Admiral Vance, your father, directly that Major Elara Vance is your daughter, and she is a born commander you missed." The words hit me not with a shockwave, but with a quiet, profound tremor. It was as if the ground beneath me, which had been crumbling all night, suddenly solidified. Colonel Thorne's words were not just recognition. They were a shield, strong and unwavering, protecting me from my father's judgment, from the insidious whispers of doubt that had begun to consume me. There was no need to argue, no need to prove myself. My work had spoken for itself, loudly and unequivocally, in the highest echelons of the Navy. I breathed a sigh of immense relief, a deep, cleansing breath that seemed to pull the despair from my very bones. The tears that finally came were not of sorrow, but of release, of a quiet, profound validation. The quiet planning began not with a grand epiphany, but with a subtle recalibration of my internal compass. Colonel Thorne's words had been a lifeline, pulling me from the abyss, but they hadn't erased the hurt. What they did do was shift my focus. I no longer yearned for my father's approval. I no longer needed his acknowledgement to define my worth. His words, delivered with such casual cruelty at the gala, still stung, but now they felt distant, like the echo of a forgotten battle. My energy, once wasted on trying to bridge an unbridgeable chasm, was now redirected inward, toward rebuilding from the ground up. I returned to my lab with a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet intensity that had perhaps been missing before. The code, which had seemed so meaningless hours earlier, now pulsed with a new significance. Each line, each algorithm, was not just a task, but a step in my own reclamation. I immersed myself in my work, finding solace in its logic and its undeniable results. I meticulously analyzed the Night Shield exercise, not for flaws in my own performance, there were none, but to understand every nuance of the simulated attack, to identify even more robust countermeasures, to push the boundaries of what was possible in electronic warfare. I spent countless hours in the quiet hum of the servers, my mind sharp, focused, and utterly free from the need for external validation. This was my domain, a realm where merit, not lineage, spoke the loudest. I started collecting strength, not from external sources, but from within. I began to trust my instincts again, that quiet, insistent voice that had warned me of the impending storm. I started tracking truth, not just in data logs, but in human interactions. I observed. I listened. I learned to discern genuine support from superficial pleasantries, true respect from polite dismissal. My colleagues, sensing a subtle shift in my demeanor, a new solidity, a quiet confidence, began to approach me with even more difficult problems, seeking my unique perspective. I became a trusted resource, a quiet authority in my field. I reclaimed control not through confrontation, but through competence. I focused on excelling, not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove to myself that I was capable, that my chosen path was valid and vital. I started taking on more challenging projects, volunteering for high-pressure situations, not for glory, but for the sheer intellectual satisfaction of mastering them. I found a deep gratification in the silent victories, in the complex problems solved, in the invisible shields I helped erect to protect those who served on the front lines. The bitterness that had threatened to consume me began to recede, replaced by a cool, clear determination. My strength was not in shouting or demanding, but in the quiet, undeniable efficacy of my work. This was the seed of transformation, planted in the fertile ground of betrayal, watered by quiet resilience. The turn, when it came, was not a dramatic confrontation, but a subtle, dignified shift in power, felt more in the quiet currents of influence than in any overt action. It began not with a bang, but with a series of ripples. Colonel Thorne's words to my father had been a precisely aimed arrow, piercing through his carefully constructed reality. The full report on Night Shield wasn't just a commendation, it was an undeniable, irrefutable validation of my strategic acumen, delivered at the highest levels. This wasn't a matter of opinion or personal bias, it was hard data, indisputable results, presented by a commanding officer whose reputation was beyond reproach. My father, the formidable Admiral Vance, had built his entire identity on his judgment, his strategic foresight, his unwavering command. For someone of Colonel Thorne's caliber to directly contradict his assessment of his own daughter, and to do so with such blunt, undeniable evidence of my command instinct, was a profound public blow to his carefully cultivated image. He couldn't dismiss it as just another one of Elara's quirks. He couldn't ignore the findings of Fleet Command. The truth, in this context, was far more potent than any shouted accusation. A few weeks later, the call came. My private line, ringing unexpectedly. It was my father. His voice, usually a booming instrument of authority, was different. It was hesitant, almost uncertain. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a fragile, unfamiliar tone. He didn't apologize, not directly. He wasn't capable of that. But he said, "I heard you did very well in the exercise. I'm proud of you." That was all. Simple words, yet laden with a weight of unsaid things, of admissions he couldn't quite vocalize. He heard. He saw. And perhaps, for the first time, he truly understood. Those words, so simple, yet so profound in their delivery, were all I needed. I no longer sought his approval. I had moved beyond that desperate need, but those words told me that, finally, he truly saw me. Not as a disappointment, not as a deviation, but as a competent, capable woman who had forged her own path and succeeded on her own terms. It wasn't a triumph over him, but a quiet moment of mutual recognition. He acknowledged my existence, my contribution, my worth. The need for external validation, which had once been a gnawing ache, had finally vanished. This moment felt earned, not forced. It wasn't a dramatic public exposure of his past cruelty, but a silent, internal reckoning for him, catalyzed by undeniable facts. The revenge, if one could even call it that, was not loud or vindictive, it was dignified. It was the quiet, undeniable power of truth. My actions, my competence, had spoken louder than any words, and in doing so, had subtly, irrevocably shifted the dynamic. He was forced to confront his own misjudgment, not by my anger, but by my quiet success. It was a victory of self-worth, not a vengeance. The fallout for my father was not a dramatic collapse, but a slow, quiet attrition of his certainty. He didn't face public ridicule or formal reprimand, but the quiet conversations shifted. The unwavering respect he commanded began to fray at the edges. His former colleagues, the very men who had laughed politely at his dismissive remarks, now knew the full story of Night Shield and my crucial role. They knew Colonel Thorne's unequivocal assessment. The subtle, almost imperceptible glances he received now carried a different weight, not of admiration, but of a quiet, unstated reassessment. He was a man who prided himself on his judgment, and in this instance, his judgment had been demonstrably, profoundly flawed. The consequences caught up not through my actions, but through the objective truth of the situation. He carried the weight of that, not because I inflicted it, but because it was inherent in the truth. Meanwhile, I healed. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece, I reclaimed my life. The wounds of betrayal, deep and painful, began to scab over, then fade into scars. The process was not linear. There were still moments, quiet evenings when a fleeting memory of his words would resurface, a sharp phantom pain. But these moments became less frequent, less potent. I learned to acknowledge the hurt, to feel it, and then to let it go. I understood that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about integrating the experience, learning from it, and moving forward with a deeper understanding of myself and the world. I accepted Colonel Thorne's offer to lead a new strategic project, not for fame, but because I knew my work truly made a difference. This wasn't about ambition, it was about purpose. The project was challenging, demanding, requiring every ounce of my skill and ingenuity. It was a deep dive into next-generation cyber defense, designing systems that could anticipate and neutralize threats before they even materialized. I poured myself into it, finding a profound satisfaction in the complexity, in the knowledge that my efforts were genuinely contributing to national security. My team, composed of brilliant, dedicated individuals, became a new kind of family, bound by shared objectives and mutual respect. There was no need for pretense, no subtle power plays, just a collective commitment to excellence. I also reconnected with people who had always truly seen me. Old friends, former professors who had always encouraged my unconventional path. Our conversations were grounding, reminding me of the authentic connections that had always existed, even when I had been too consumed by familial disapproval to fully appreciate them. I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned, small joys that had been eclipsed by the constant striving for validation. I started painting again, abstract canvases filled with vibrant colors, a stark contrast to the precise, logical world of code. It was a release, a different kind of creative expression that allowed my mind to wander freely. The world outside my work became richer, more textured. The ocean walks were no longer just a place for quiet contemplation, they were a place of profound gratitude. The salt spray on my face felt like a blessing, the vastness of the Pacific a metaphor for the boundless possibilities that now stretched before me. I wasn't defined by my family's expectations or my father's rejection. I was defined by my capabilities, by my resilience, by the quiet strength I had found in the crucible of betrayal. The healing was ongoing, a continuous process of growth and self-discovery, but I was firmly on the path. Each piece of my life, once shattered, was being carefully, deliberately, put back together, stronger and more whole than before. Closure wasn't a sudden, dramatic pronouncement, but a quiet, internal realization. I am free. Not because I forgot the sting of betrayal, but because I outgrew the pain. It's no longer a raw wound, but a faded scar, reminder of where I've been, not where I am going. There is no bitterness that lingers, no gnawing desire for further retribution. The drama of the past has dissolved, leaving behind a clear, unburdened strength. My life is no longer about proving my father wrong, but about proving myself right. It's about building something meaningful, about contributing in ways that resonate with my core being. I still see my father occasionally, at family gatherings that are now less frequent, less fraught with tension. There's a quiet civility between us, an unspoken acknowledgement of the new dynamic. He still struggles with direct apologies, but his eyes, when they meet mine, no longer hold that dismissive judgment. Sometimes, I catch him watching me, a flicker of something akin to respect, or perhaps even pride, in his gaze. It's a small thing, but it's enough. I walk through the world with a new sense of quiet confidence, grounded in my own capabilities and validated by my own achievements. The silence of the lab, the intricate dance of data, the unseen battles I help win, these are my truths, my legacy. I am a commander, not of ships on the high seas, but of the invisible forces that shape them. My command instinct was always there, waiting to be unleashed, stifled only by external voices that couldn't see past their own narrow definitions. True strength isn't found in rank, but in the ability to see the unseen and protect it. It's in the quiet resilience to rebuild when everything shatters, and the unwavering conviction to forge your own path, regardless of the resistance. It's in knowing that your worth is intrinsic, not derived from the approval of others. Have you found your way back from betrayal?